What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
That is James MENNIE. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, I was talking earlier to Gerald Battist. He, of course, wrote that op-ed in the Gazette over the weekend, talking about the fact that he's tried, gone down to the McGill campus. He's a professor, of course, there. Tried to engage in conversation and simply has not been able to with any of the protesters there. And then Friday when we spoke, I guess, Jim, I'm not sure if it was just before or after, they announced that youth camp, which was supposed to start today. And finally today, we heard from Montreal Police, David Shane with Montreal Police, saying that the RCMP has now been notified. So is this the beginning of the end, do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's the beginning of the end, and I think the occupiers / protesters know it, and I think they are the ones who tipped over the first domino with that very controversial, very provocative advertisement for their summer program. I looked at it, and the first words that went through my mind were, they're dragging their coat. They realized, and to a certain extent, I think that kind of showed, and I know people will disagree with this, I think it showed that the strategy of the Montreal Police was working, that we're not going to turn you guys into, quote unquote, martyrs for the cause. You were going to sit there, and they were sitting there, and they were quiet, and there was no reason for the cops to move in. Here's the problem. When you're doing a protest and you want to put yourself on the map, being quiet and not being noticed by people, and I can absolutely assure you that the level of coverage this camp was getting dropped precipitously, once that sort of status quo had been established. I'm not at all surprised to see this deliberate, as far as I'm concerned, deliberate provocation. And I would be very surprised if sometime between now and and the end of this week, that camp is still around. But yeah, the very fact that the cops got up, I mean, this is a shot right across their bows, because we know, and some of our listeners have been very, very frustrated with the whole attitude police have taken towards this. But when the cops said, we've noticed this, and we are showing this to the RCMP. Now, the only reason they would show this to the RCMP, they deal in cases of potential terrorism. They may want to investigate who's in that photo, where that photo comes from, what these courses are, and frankly, the RCMP has a larger intelligence base to consult than the Montreal Police Department. But yeah, I got the impression the minute this ad was made public that they're looking for a fight, because without a fight, no one's going to notice that they're there. And I think they want to be noticed. And I think that if in the end they do get tossed out of there, they'll say they'll have made their point.
Right.
But obviously this was not going to go on for much longer. We're only 10 days away from their having been there for 2 months. And I think it's clear that, they could walk away from there today saying, we made our point, we were noticed. But I think they'd rather go out with, how can I put it, a metaphorical bang rather than a whimper. So, yeah, I think you're going to see the tone crank up in the days to come. And clearly between the demonstration that took place outside of City Hall today, the reaction even of the Plante administration saying indeed, and I guess quite predictably, that this particular advertisement that they put up was unacceptable, and the suggestion, the tacit suggestion of violence in it was enough to, I think, raise some hackles over at City Hall. So yeah, I think we're looking at the denouement, as we say in these here parts. I say by the end of the week, maybe it'll be longer, but the fact is, I think we will see this camp gone sooner rather than later.
By the way, with respect to the city, and I think this was a point made earlier today, I had not heard anything different. I know David Hertel mentioned it. We'd heard from we'd heard from Pascal Derry provincially. We'd heard from, I think, Dominic LeBlanc federally. I had not heard anything from the city about this latest provocation. Has there now been a statement?
Yeah, there's been a statement. Well, they were inevitably scrummed. There's a meeting of council today. And Alain Vaillancourt, who's responsible for public security on the city's executive committee, basically he said he's shocked and alarmed by and I'll use the word tacit violence in this advertisement. But he once again, as shocked as he said he was, he says, I'm going to leave this to the cops. There's been questions about this by the opposition in council. He says, I'm going to leave this to the cops. And I guess what we saw at this 3:30 presser that we're just hearing about now, I think the cops are making it very clear that if you're at the camp right now, you might want to start packing your things. And if you don't want to pack your things, you'll probably end up having to pack up your things sooner rather than later.
Okay. Let's move on from that and talk about what everybody's going to be talking about for the next couple of days, and that's the weather. We've already heard about how hot it's going to be. I love your headline, which says, remember when weather stories weren't political? How's this political?
Well, I can remember when they were. There was the weather, but now it's either has the city done enough to be prepared for the heat wave? Is there enough resources in the city of Montreal to deal with climate change? This is going to be the rule, not the exception. Why do I not know how many? Why are not all the splash pads available on the city of Montreal? To be fair to the city, I think they were as ignorant about this coming heat wave as we were. We only got a glimpse. We only had a hint about this late last week, that this was coming down the pike. But once again, it is the climate, the fallout, whether it's super cold and people are freezing to death waiting for buses that don't arrive, or people are trying to get into to the local pool, but they can't get in because, as we just heard the city representative say, well, we have to make sure that all the water's proper and this and that, and it's all kind of, we're trying to accelerate the process. But people will say, no, we're not ready. And all of a sudden, there is a very real political context to this. And it's kind of funny because back in the day when it rained like crazy, okay, fine, we got to clean up, we got to deal with it. No one really pointed the finger at City Hall or the National Assembly or the Houses of Parliament because of what the weather was on a given day. I think these days that has changed.
All right. Look, I mean, I heard Pierre Sabrin from the city talking about things that are open. They seem kind of prepared, at least from what I heard, Jim. Outdoor pools, indoor pools, the splash pads.
I mean, there is an entire protocol that exists.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the first time it's happened. And if you go on the city website, you'll see there's an entire protocol that exists. They have a definition of a heat wave, which I believe is 3 days of consecutive weather where it's over like 33 degrees, and the night it doesn't go below 25. And then they do, and they've already sent out teams to talk to the homeless in the city to urge them to get into shelters and take advantage of the air conditioning where available. But the fact is, I always get the impression, with the initial coverage at least of these heat waves, that there is a presumption that nobody was ready, and my God, how could this have happened? And to a certain extent, that concern is justified. You'll recall that a couple of years back, and I was shocked. I remember I talked to you about this on air. There was an overall sort of like a post-mortem, if you will, of a major heat wave that hit the Montreal area, I think 2 or 3 years ago. 400 people died.
Right.
And they were the elderly. They were living alone. They had no access to air conditioning. And it was a staggering number. And it's certainly one that we have to pay attention to. But you know what? It's not every other day that you and I are talking about the latest debate over, ensuring that air conditioning is a mandatory part of someone's living conditions in the city of Montreal. And yet here we are. Maybe we will be getting to that the more these heat waves occur. And certainly this one here it's earlier in the year, but once again, it's not a first. We've had them this early in the past, although apparently, from what I can understand, the humidity that's coming with this one is brand new. Up until now, it's been a lot of heat, but now with the heat and the haze and the humidity, as we heard on the newscast, it's going to be a tough 3 days.
Jim, before I let you go, I'm going to bring this question back, talking about the fact that, we're about 2 weeks away from moving day here. And the number, according to Quebec's own public housing agency, says there'll be twice as many people this year looking for housing as there were last year. And we know how bad last year was. I've offered up a solution. I don't want to get into that. What do you, first of all, do you think there is a solution to this beyond just we need to build more, because we know that's not happening anytime soon?
I don't, and I think that we're not looking. I don't think a lot of levels of government are treating this as seriously as they should. I think they look at it and they say, well, I could afford this housing. There's plenty of housing out there. A lot of people out there who cannot afford even the average rent, and it's not because they're welfare recipients or stumble bumps. There are people who are trying to make ends meet. That's a reality in this country. And whether, or if you prefer, that's a reality in this nation. And the sooner the politicians figure that out and realize that people are becoming exponentially more angry and frustrated over the fact that they just don't get it, that the Premier of Quebec has no idea how much it costs, the average cost of an apartment in Montreal, no idea whatsoever. And I guess why not? What does he care? He's never going to have to rent one, right? So, or he's not going to worry about the rent. But this wall of ignorance willful or not, is unacceptable, because if there's one issue that's front and center for a growing number of Quebecers, Montrealers, and Canadians, it's the issue of housing. And I fear that the whole tone is just going to get uglier the longer politicians at all levels of government try to keep us at arm's length.
James MENNIE at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Ademant.